We flew from Colorado Springs to Buenos Aires through the DFW airport with American Airlines. Buenos Aires is the capital of Argentina. Founded in 1536 by Pedro Mendoza, today the city has a population of 3.1 million, while the metropolitan area includes 16.8 million. Our transfer from the airport to the ship went smoothly. The port is commercial, and that required a bus ride from the terminal to the ship. This is our third time in Buenos Aires, so we stayed on board and made ourselves acquainted with the ship and rested from the long flight. We had a unique experience at lunch the next day. One of the ladies at our table was the first girl born in Antarctica. We found a team for the progressive trivia contest and relaxed reading and playing cards. Punta Arenas was established in 1848 as a penal colony. The name means sandy point and originates from the 1669 voyage of John Narborough. Located on the Brunswick Peninsula, this is one of the southernmost cities in the world and serves as the major port for journeys to the Antarctic continent. After tendering from the ship, we walked to the main square. We enjoyed entertainment provided by two groups that alternated performances. A couple displayed traditional Chilean dances while a second group played drums. We enjoyed the architecture of the buildings that surrounded the square. After purchasing some cough drops at a local pharmacy, we browsed through items for sale in stalls that were set up around the square. Leaving the square, we walked to the shoreline and returned to the ship, observing the harbor area. This Punta Arenas sign was a popular place for tourists to take pictures. There was a monument dedicated to the Chilean ship that rescued Ernest Shackleton's crew from Elephant Island in 1916. With a population of 82,000, Ushuaia claims to be the world's southernmost city. The city lies on a wide bay, bounded by the Marshall Mountain Range to the north and the Beagle Channel to the south. The HMS Beagle sailed through this channel under the command of Robert Fitzroy during its maiden voyage in 1833. Founded in 1884 by Augusto Lasserre, Ushuaia is one of the most beautiful ports we have ever sailed into. We have been fortunate enough to have visited here twice. Tourists can reach the Tierra del Fuego National Park by car or train from here. Ushuaia is one of 5 Antarctic gateway cities. In Ushuaia, we took a ship's tour to see penguins. The twin-hull catamaran left from the harbor area near the ship. The trip offered great views of the mountains surrounding the city and gave you a sense of Ushuaia's unique setting. We sailed by the airport, which had quite a few flights going and coming. Our first destination was a small island in the Beagle Channel 5 miles from Ushuaia. The island has a small lighthouse that is remotely controlled from town. This island has a large number of emperor cormorants and South American sea lions. Our next destination was Hammer Island, which is also known as Islas del Atlántico Sur. There is a large colony of penguins on this island that allows you to get a close-up view from the boat to the shore. We spent a long time adjacent to the shore watching the penguins' interaction with each other and the cormorants that also inhabited the shoreline. This was a large colony of Magellanic penguins. On the return trip, we made a brief stop at this shipwreck. After leaving Ushuaia, we crossed the Drake Passage to the Antarctic Peninsula. The Drake Passage is notorious for rough seas. However, our passage was quite smooth. The next 4 days were spent cruising the bays and inlets of the Antarctic Peninsula. This has to be one of the most unique experiences we have ever had. Tabular icebergs are formed when part of an ice shelf detaches. They are huge compared to icebergs that are formed from glacial calving. Our naturalist explained that this is a very old tabular iceberg that has deteriorated over a long period of time. Most icebergs are glacial in nature. That is, they are formed with a segment of a tidewater glacier detaches and floats away from the glacier. These islands that have a low and rounded silhouette are formed when a glacier has advanced over them and worn the tops away. Our captain, Todd McBain, has made 40 Antarctic cruises. He indicated that this cruise had the best weather of any of the trips he has taken to this unique environment. We were truly amazed and overwhelmed at the mountains we saw in this strait. While not as tall as the mountains we are familiar with in Colorado, they have a majestic beauty as they rise from the ocean surface. These jagged peaks make up the Seven Dwarfs Range and are on the southern portion of Enver Island. Due to an intense storm system moving into the area, the captain decided to reverse the normal direction of the cruise. We sailed directly to the westernmost point of the cruise and then worked our way back east to Elephant Island. Butler Passage is a passage between the Warmans Islands and the Puzzle Islands, connecting Peltier Channel and Lemaire Channel, off the west coast of Graham Land. The route was probably first used by the French Antarctic expedition under Jean-Baptiste Charcot in 1903 on their trips between Port Lockroy and Booth Island. During this passage, we saw several seals and penguins sunning themselves on icebergs that were floating in the waters of this channel. This channel was teeming with icebergs. It was quite amazing to see the various colors and shapes these floating ice cubes displayed. The captain then headed towards Paradise Bay by traversing Lemaire Channel. There was too much ice to enter this channel, so he turned the ship through 360 degrees, allowing all passengers to see the channel. No princess ship has ever been this far south. Paradise Bay was named by whalers in the early 1920s. However, whaling activity was outlawed in 1986. Argentina and Chile have research stations located in Paradise Bay. This is one of the coldest and windiest places on the continent. We were extremely fortunate to be able to visit this location. Paradise Bay is ringed by mountains and glaciers. We saw seals and penguins sunning themselves on icebergs. At one point, we heard glacier thunder from the movement of the glaciers as they made their way to the ocean. The captain spun the ship around 360 degrees when we reached the southern end of the bay. We were able to have stunning views of Rojas Peak, Bride Peak, and the Pellsville Glacier. There was an abundance of humpback and minke whales as well as a colony of genta penguins. Leaving Paradise Bay, the captain took the ship to a location to spend the night where he had open water where there were no icebergs. Our first destination today is Port Lacroix. Port Lacroix is a bay forming a natural harbor on the northwestern shore of Wink Island in the Palmer Archipelago to the west of the Antarctic Peninsula. We passed by Mount Francais, which is the tallest mountain on Enver Island. There was an expedition ship stationed in the next bay and 3 private yachts that had anchored by Gaudier Island. The Antarctic base with the same name, situated on Gaudier Island in this bay, includes the most southerly operational post office and museum in the world. It is manned by 5 British volunteers. These volunteers remain on the island during the 5 summer months with minimal facilities. Since they have no running water, our captain invited the crew to come aboard the ship for hot showers and a meal. They also did a question-and-answer session in the Princess Theater while the ship navigated nearby waters. During this time, we saw a whale surface near the ship and a large chunk of ice that was about to calve off the glacier. We then returned the volunteers to Port Lacroix and headed towards the Neumayer Channel. Leaving Port Lacroix, we sailed 3 miles to the Neumayer Strait. On the way, the captain circumnavigated a large iceberg. Vicky observed a large seal, sunning on another iceberg, that dove into the water as the ship went past. His action caused the small iceberg to break into many pieces. The Neumayer Strait is 16 miles long and 1.5 miles wide, separating Enver Island and Wink Island. It is known for its inverted S shape and towering cliffs. Both the entrance and the exit to the channel feature sharp bends, which require good navigational skills for large passenger ships. During the passage, we saw more seals on an iceberg. We had good weather, and most people were out on the top deck observing the scenery. While I was up front on deck 16, there was an avalanche on the right canyon wall. As we exited the strait to Wilhelmina Bay, we had to steer around a large tabular iceberg. The 17-mile-wide Wilhelmina Bay lies between the Reckless Peninsula and Cape Anna. The bay is an extension of the Gerlache Strait and lies immediately south of Charlotte Bay, which extends to the east. The bay is noted for its dense population of humpback whales. The bay was discovered by Adrian de Gerlache in 1897, who named it after the current Dutch queen. The very noticeable white line extending through these photos mark where fresh water melting from the 5 glaciers in the bay meets the salt water from the ocean. Charlotte Bay extends some 12 miles west into the Antarctic Peninsula. This bay was also discovered by Gerlache during his 1897 expedition. After a late departure from Charlotte Bay, the captain again took the ship into safe waters free of icebergs for the night. Today we will visit 2 primary locations, Deception Island and Admiralty Bay on King George Island. Crossing the Bransfield Strait, we arrived at Deception Island before 7 the next morning. Like Molokini in Hawaii and Santorini in Greece, Deception Island is a sunken volcano caldera. This is an active volcano since the last eruption occurred in 1970. This was the center of a large whaling industry, and several abandoned whaling cabins lie within the caldera. Also, there are 2 manned research stations located on the island. The last cruise ship to enter the caldera was the Sapphire Princess, which was captained by our current captain. However, only smaller expedition ships are allowed inside the caldera at present, as the entrance is narrow and has sunken rocks. The entrance to the caldera is called Neptune's Bellows. The large rock marking the right hand of Neptune's Bellows is called Peter's Pillar. We passed an unusual formation called the Sewing Machine and Needle. Just as we passed the Sewing Machine and Needle, it began to snow. We also came to a black sand beach with hundreds of genta penguins. With binoculars, we were able to watch them jump into the water and surf back to the beach. Leaving Deception Island, we passed a large iceberg with several penguins on it. We then headed to Admiralty Bay on King George Island. Admiralty Bay is located on King George Island in the South Shetland archipelago. It indents the south shore of the island some 10 miles. It is an irregular bay, having 3 distinct fjords, Escura, McKellar, and Martel. Due to the exceptional weather, the captain took us into each of the 3 inlets. The bay is dotted with at least 9 tidewater glaciers. Many different countries have research stations on King George Island. We passed the Brazilian and Peruvian stations. Large cruise ships do not normally come into Admiralty Bay, so when we approached the Peruvian station, all hands appeared on the shore and waved to the ship. Admiralty Bay was one of the great highlights of this cruise. We have seen the fjords of Norway, Chile, New Zealand, and Alaska, but nothing compares to the frozen wilderness that makes up the continent of Antarctica. Nowhere we have been has there been such a concentration of tidewater glaciers as in this one bay. This is a pristine environment, where the only sounds are that of the wind, the birds, and the occasional glacier thunder as the glaciers make their slow migration to the sea. We were told that less than 1% of the people who have ever lived on our planet have set their eyes on this place. We feel blessed to be included in that number. As you view the bays, inlets, and glaciers along the Antarctic Peninsula, you will be amazed at the various shades of white and blue colors displayed in the ice and water. The water is colored by the minerals from the glacial melt. The blue seen in the ice of the glacial walls come from the diffraction of the light passing through the ice. As the day ended, the captain turned the ship to the northeast and headed to Elephant Island. This will be our last day of cruising along the Antarctic Peninsula. The captain will take us to Elephant Island, where he will exhibit some exceptional piloting skills at Point Wild. Elephant Island is an ice-covered, mountainous island off the coast of Antarctica in the outer reaches of the South Shetland Islands. Elephant Island's name is attributed to both its elephant head-like appearance and the sighting of elephant seals by Captain George Powell in 1821, one of the earliest sightings. The island was the desolate refuge of the British explorer Ernest Shackleton and his crew in 1916 following the loss of their ship Endurance in the pack ice of the Weddell Sea. The crew of 28 reached Cape Valentine on Elephant Island after months spent drifting on ice floes and a harrowing crossing of the open ocean in small lifeboats. After camping at Cape Valentine for 2 nights, Shackleton and his crew moved 7 miles west to a small, rocky spit at the terminus of a glacier, which offered better protection from rockfalls and from the sea, and which they called Point Wild. Realizing that there was no chance of rescue, Shackleton decided to sail to South Georgia, where he knew there were several whaling stations. Shackleton sailed with 5 other crew members 800 miles to South Georgia in 16 days. He returned 4 months later to rescue the remaining crew left at Point Wild on Elephant Island. Point Wild is a small bay in which the Endurance Glacier meets the ocean. This is where the Shackleton party spent almost a year before being rescued. There were thousands of penguins on the rocky ledges marking either side of the bay. We enjoyed watching their activity as the captain maneuvered the ship into this small space and turned the ship through 360 degrees. There was minimal clearance between the rocky shoreline and the bow and stern of the ship. This was a fantastic way to end our cruising around the Antarctic Peninsula. The South Shetland Islands are separated from the Antarctic Peninsula by an underwater ridge about 1,000 meters below the surface. We crossed the Drake Passage once again, headed to the Falkland Islands. We had perfect weather and calm seas. Port Stanley is a tender port located on the eastern Falkland Island. The visitor center was located by the dock. An attendant recommended we walk west on Ross Road to the War Memorial. Our first stop was the Christ Church Cathedral, with a distinctive whalebone arch commemorating the 100th anniversary of becoming a British protectorate in 1832. The mizzen mast of the ship Great Britain was placed on display in 1973 to commemorate the restoration of the ship. The Great Britain was launched in 1843 and was the largest ship in the world at that time. It serviced the Falklands for 80 years before it was returned to Bristol, England for restoration in 1970. We passed the police station and the Catholic church before stopping at the post office to take pictures of the red phone booth and mailbox, which is typical of England. A bust of Margaret Thatcher and the War Memorial was our turnaround spot. The War Memorial is dedicated to the 255 British soldiers who died in the 1982 war with Argentina over control of the Falkland Islands. After tendering back to the ship, we sailed out of the bay and headed to Montevideo, Uruguay. We observed several genta penguins along the shoreline of the bay. After leaving Port Stanley, we had 2 days at sea before arriving at Montevideo. On the first sea day, we were able to visit briefly with Captain McBain during a photo opportunity. On the second day at sea, we finished the progressive trivia contest with our team. We had 2 excellent waiters in the Vivaldi dining room who were both from India. This is our second visit to Montevideo. We decided to take the hop-on hop-off bus. The first route took us to the major sites in the city: Independence Square, the Botanical Gardens, government buildings, the Presidential Palace, and the soccer stadium where Uruguay defeated Argentina in 1930 for the first World Cup. About 40% of Uruguay's population live in Montevideo. Uruguay is the most literate country in South America. The second route took us along the shoreline of the Rio de la Plata. At its widest, this river is 136 miles across. It was quite windy, so there was limited activity in the water. We passed the Carrasco Casino and drove through a fancy shopping area before returning to the ship. The ship was being restocked while we were gone for the day. On our previous 2 trips to Buenos Aires, we have done a tour of the city and a tour of the Tigre River Delta. Since our flight was late that night, we took a ship's tour to a gaucho ranch outside the city. We had a very good guide that shared a lot of information about the culture of the gauchos. The ranch, Estancia Mimosa, was a 90-minute drive from the port. The ranch was established in 1869 by the grandfather of the current owner. When we arrived, we were served drinks and empanadas, and some of the staff performed 2 different traditional Argentine dances. After their performances, we moved to a field behind the manor house, where 3 gauchos demonstrated a traditional contest in which they attempted to spear small rings suspended from a bar while galloping at full speed. Traditionally, if the gaucho is successful in spearing the ring, he would give it to a lady he wanted to date.
No. Yes, we got. Yes.
After the gaucho contest, we proceeded to the dining hall, where we were served salads, beefsteaks, ribs, and chicken. The meats were cooked over an open fire in an area behind the dining hall. After the meal, the dancers performed several dances, played drums, and demonstrated skill with the baladora. The baladora was a weapon the gauchos used in defense and to capture animals for their food. We were then given free time before loaded the buses and heading to the airport. We had several hours to kill before our flight left at 11 p.m. After a smooth check-in for the flight, we found a spot to lounge and play cards. About 40 minutes before our flight was scheduled to leave, we went to the appropriate gate to board. An attendant came over and informed us that we had contraband items in our checked bag and that we had to go to security to remove the items. A lady escorted us through the restricted area of the airport to where security had our bags. We removed the battery backups I had brought for our phones. They had not been a problem on the flight from the States. We returned to the gate just in time to board our flight home. Our flight home went through Miami and Dallas before landing at Colorado Springs. Jody picked us up at the airport and delivered us safely home. We were exhausted from the flights, but we both agreed that the 4 days cruising the Antarctic Peninsula was an experience we would always treasure.